Meanwhile, South Africa is working towards allowing all African citizens to enter the country without visas. But at first, trusted travelers like diplomats, officials, academics, business people and students will be the only ones to benefit. Now, the Department of Home Affairs outlines the steps that will be taken towards scrapping visa requirements in its latest white paper on international migration, which of course was adopted by Cabinet 6 weeks ago, but not made public yet. Now, joining us in the studio is Professor Peter Kagwanja. He is the CEO of the Africa Policy Institute. Welcome into the studio, sir.
Thank you, Richard.
Now, some, of course, warn that scrapping these visa requirements for Africans, it needs to happen with caution. They need to be cautious about security when they're doing this. What is your take, in light of all this, what is your take on this move by South Africa's government? Of course, given the fact that South Africa has had quite a number of immigration issues with the rest of Africa in the past.
I think South Africa is blazing the trail for the rest of Africa. It is not an isolated policy. It is part of the African Union Vision 2063 to abolish boundaries for Africa so that we can expand space for trade and exchange. You can see the people exempted are also academics, that intellectual talents can move across Africa. So I think it's positive. Of course, there's need for caution, and I think South Africa is taking that into account because of the easy migration of terrorists, for example, or
That's
extremists. Right. South Africa has in the past been seen not only as hostile to other Africans, seen in the form of xenophobia, but also an area of incubation for violent extremists from many parts of Africa. Therefore, it's a positive development, but at the same time, it calls for not caution, but more vigilance.
Well, how do you view this proposal, of course, in light of these xenophobic attacks that happened just early this year, as you mentioned, and certainly how the rest of Africa is receiving this news? Did you review it with some skepticism or?
Well, I think it's a masterstroke in African diplomacy because South Africa has been on the receiving end, and I think it reached a point where the debate on Africa's contribution to apartheid started featuring Nigerians saying that they paid, a naira for South Africa to be free. Every child in school had to pay a naira so that the South Africans can be free. And then when they are free, they start calling you makwere, meaning strangers. That in itself didn't sink well. And the deputy president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, was forced to do a diplomatic, shuttle diplomacy from South Africa to many countries, including Kenya, openly apologizing to the populations of Africa for what was happening on the continent. And I think this easing of immigration, requirements for African people is an attempt by South Africa, and I think it's a successful attempt to kind of make a comeback in the Pan-African circles, and I think it's a good move.
Now, as you mentioned, this move also stems from the African Union's Agenda 2063 plan, which of course calls for the scrapping of visa requirements for all African citizens traveling around the continent, and that's by 2018. So looking at that, do you think it's attainable?
I think within the continent, it might be attainable. South Africa is a prime destination for many Africans, and South Africans are themselves, major visitors to African countries in search of trading opportunities, investment opportunities for their, their economy is a little bit maturer than the rest of Africa. So South Africa needs the rest of Africa, and for certain issues like education, medical facilities or medical support, and so on, the rest of Africa needs South Africa. So it's mutual.
But what about the rest of Africa? For example, what about Kenya opening its borders up to other African citizens? Do you think other African countries are ready to do this? I
think we already have that. If you are a Kenyan, you experience some certain privileges. If you are traveling to Southern Africa, you travel to Zimbabwe without a visa, to Namibia without a visa, to Zambia, all the major countries in Southern Africa until you reach South Africa. then you start finding yourself needing a visa. If I'm going to Ethiopia, I don't need a visa. An Ethiopian coming to Kenya doesn't need a visa. In the whole of the Horn of Africa, there's nowhere I need a visa except Sudan. And even Sudan, if you're going on a government to government or other, you know, a special guest, then you don't even need a visa. You need a visa on entry. So already we have seen the collapsing of the boundaries. I have traveled to Senegal. I didn't need a visa from anybody. I just walk and I get it on the entry in Dakar. So there's already that. I think the problem was South Africa, because for many years, Uche, South Africa was seen as a white tip on of a black continent.
That's true.
And that white tip sometimes would be too white, in the sense that it locked the rest of Africa out. And it's amazing when you go to South Africa, sometimes you find, you know, some South African asking you, oh, how is Africa? You know, so I think the crossing of the boundaries is going to make South Africa Africa. Yeah, and I think it's a positive development.
So it sounds like you're definitely convinced that borders are melting across the continent.
And they will have to melt. Of course, in East Africa, they have melted. You don't need to feel that you need anything to travel to Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Eastern Congo, and South Sudan. It's only when you travel to Sudan and so on. But let me say this, the context of within which this is happening is so critical, because Africa is opening up to itself and to the rest of Africa at a time when the rest of the countries are becoming more and more isolationist and more protectionist. Therefore, for South Africa to think of opening its borders now, it should be applauded. It's a very, very, very positive movement and a challenge to the rest of the world to emulate, because we cannot be talking about globalization, the global village, the collapsing of boundaries, and then we are bringing up the 19th century protectionism and isolationism, as we are seeing in America. You know, dropping people at the airports, you don't even know where they are going. It's very, very inhuman processes. So I think we should applaud South Africa for this move and encourage them to open to more people. I can see they are opening to special classes, the academics, the business people, people with special needs, medical or otherwise. I think they should open for everyone, including people from the informal sector. These are the ones actually who need the borders opened in order to do trade with that mighty country.
Well, thank you so much for joining us in the studio with your insights. Of course, that was Professor Peter Kagwanja. He's the CEO at the Africa Policy Institute.